Thank you very much, Brian. Good afternoon. So we're going to be talking today about commercial capacity in CDMOs. Often heralded as a fundamental part of the facility of the future, single use is now a prevalent part of the bioprocessing space. But does this mean industry's historic reliance on stainless steel and fixed facilities is over? In this roundtable discussion, we're going to discuss the wealth of investment in single-use equipment and flexible manufacturing solutions by CDMOs over the past few years, and pit this against what looks like a resurgence, perhaps, in fixed-cost stainless steel plants from a certain group of biomanufacturers. So we are joined by a great panel today, and going from your right, my left, we have Jim Vogel, who is the founder and director of the Bioprocess Institute. He has over 34 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical, food and cosmetic industries, and he also serves as director of the University of Rhode Island's College of Pharmacy GMP facility. Next to him, we have Jennifer Wheat, who is the head of commercial development for mammalian manufacturing at Lonza. Next to her, we have Wei-Chang Zhu, who is the chief technology officer of another CDMO, Wuxi Biologics. And next to him we have Roger Lias, who is the president and CEO of Avid Bioservices. So looking a few years back at a Bioplan Associates report from Eric Langer, in the early part of this decade, mammalian cell culture CMO capacity was kind of dominated by three companies. We're talking Lonza, Boehringer Ingelheim, and to a lesser extent Celltrion. And according to the report, the three companies held over 76% of the outsourcing capacity, mainly through fixed, large stainless steel tanks. Now today, the demand for third-party biomanufacturing has increased, and those three CMOs have all upped their capacities further. But they've also been joined by a growing number of CMOs which have entered the commercial biologic space through single-use equipment and modular and flexible facilities. So the likes of Patheon, Catalent, AGC, the list goes on. So, Jim, as the non-CDMO representative on this panel, I want to know, how has single-use equipment enabled firms to jump into the biomanufacturing space as a service?
Well, I think you mentioned it up front with the initial investment. The key thing for a lot of folks is it's not as big of initial investment, so you can get started faster. And so if you have a contract, you can get those operating costs with the single-use equipment. The other key thing I think that's gone is the scales have gone down some because of the tighter levels that we're seeing. And so the technology of platforms and other things that companies are able to develop and get in, companies such as Lonza, they have a great platform and so on that can get things in. You can make more drug in a smaller container and therefore leverage that technology there. But I think most importantly for the new people coming in, it's that upfront investment. And that's both the stainless steel direct equipment, but mainly utilities and facility space to support that and their validation and upkeep, day-to-day upkeep of that.
And I'm going to jump to you, Wei-Chang, because your company is, I believe, only single-use as far as your capacity goes. And you've been expanding, but only single-use. So how is the environment allowing you to be a large player, and how is single-use affecting you?
Right. Yeah, it's a great to be here, and as Jim noted, I think one of the facts is that the flexibility and the low investment to get us started. But really what we think the single use, especially for Wuxi Biologics, play much bigger role. I think they are twofold. One is really the speed to build the facility. And for a new facility based on single-use technology, you can build maybe in 2 years for us, sometimes even faster, versus like stainless steel facility, you maybe 4 to 5 years. So that gives us more time to develop the process for commercialization. So I believe that's one of the key factors. Second is also really, even though I haven't been in this field for many years, is to address scale-up risk. So essentially, used to be, you have a phase 2, phase 3, manufacture 2,000 liter, then you need to go to 12,000 liter, 20,000 liter. This is inherent risk, both economically as well as compatibility-wise. So we are based on single-use technology. We actually adopt the so-called scale-out strategy. So essentially, you use the same size of bioreactor for your phase 2, phase 3, and then commercialization. You literally mitigated all the risk of scale up. And just to your question, go back, how's that work out for us, for WuXi? Many of you may know that we got our first product, antibody against the CD4 for HIV treatment, approved based on single-use technology by FDA. And so that gives the endorsement, at least also for us. I know there are multiple single-use technology for other product. So that's allowing us to expanding globally using single-use technology. And that's actually, I think, will further mitigate the risk. And maybe later on I can talk a little bit more if they have time to go back to Jim's point. It's really process intensification. We used to have 2 to 5 gram per liter. Now you can even go to 5 to 15 gram per liter. And so 2,000 liter used to be 2,000 liter, now could be as much as 15,000 liter in terms of productivity. So I think this will play out very nicely going forward.
Jennifer, as a representative here of a CDMO, which is one of the large stalwarts who've got huge amounts of stainless steel capacity, how do you sort of take Jim and Wei Chang's point about process intensification? Is stainless steel still your bread and butter, so to speak?
Well, I've worked for a variety of CMOs, and people tend to view Lonza as all stainless steel, but in fact we're not. I don't really think the industry is a case of either or. I think there's definitely change in the market, change in the product needs. The titers have gone up. You have smaller patient populations. You have products that have multiple indications. And there's a lot of advantage to having flexibility. So Lonza actually has everything from single-use, bioreactors, stainless steel at small, medium, and large scale. We also have some newer facilities that have single-use downstream combined with some stainless steel facilities at the mid-scale, and they can handle much higher titers than some of the previous downstream capabilities. And we still see a huge need across the large volume. We're getting still getting antibodies, but in fact almost half of what we see is not antibodies, and we're still seeing a large demand. But at the same time, we're also trying to meet the small-scale demand at earlier stages and provide flexibility. I think Wei Chang mentioned flexibility, as did Jim. You can start with us at small scale, and we talked about delaying decisions and multiplexing until you hit a certain point. And then you can choose to go commercial with multiplexing of single use, or you could choose to go mid-scale or large scale. And we've actually done some demonstrations for some of our clients where they may still choose to go single use multiplex to commercial, but you can delay until you have your phase 3 results and, for example, go to mid-scale and reduce your COGS anywhere from 24 to 45% at a mid-scale. So there are just all kinds of different examples of ways you can approach this. And then the one last thing I would say is that we also have a modular approach where we have pre-built shells where you can cut down, as both gentlemen have pointed out, the significant amount of time that's required to build facilities. And not to plug my former employer, but they also have managed to build facilities in exceptionally rapid time. So the way I see it, every product, every business case needs something different. So the key is flexibility and reliability.
From a business perspective, Jennifer, has Lonza seen, how does Lonza view the influx of competitor CDMOs who are entering the space because of single use?
It's good to support the industry because there's still a large number of products that need smaller volumes and need to scale up quickly, and it is a lower investment. I think if you're going to build your own facility as an innovator, it makes a lot of sense, and there's definitely, I mean, you can see there's definitely a need for the across the CMO industry, but I also think there are some limitations for certain products in certain situations, but any growth is good for the industry. I think there are a lot of people jumping in it, so I think as with everything in this industry, you're going to see an expansion, they're going to see it shrink back down a little bit to the reliable partners, so.
Roger, you, Avid plays in both the stainless steel and single use, a little like Lonza, but possibly on a smaller scale. How do you manage the two?
Yeah, we are fortunate to have a legacy stainless steel facility which goes to 1,000-litre working volume, so relatively small volumes for stainless steel. We're not talking about 20,000-litre assets here. These are legacy. This facility has been approved FDA, EMA for 15 years now. So essentially we've moved on, although we still operate stainless steel reactors, and we're very happy to do so at small scale. I personally wouldn't want to be holding 20,000-litre capacity right now in stainless steel. The opportunities are out there, I think, but far fewer. Obviously, we're talking about there's definitely a tipping point. I think if you really do the analysis properly, at some point, if you have a Humira or something like that, a huge volume product, I think it does make sense to transition into large-scale stainless steel. But certainly, we've made the same transition as many others. We operate a new multi-product facility, multiple 2,000-litre single-use tanks, and we see scale up as horizontal rather than vertical, without a doubt. And what the technologies do, in addition to Jim's great point, obviously we've got terrific improvements in the specific productivity of the cell lines, but we're also seeing much higher density cultures. We shouldn't forget the downstream side. We tend to think bioreactors all the time, but there's some tremendous advances coming in, including disposables in filtration and chromatography going forward. And I think that's where we're going to see the biggest advances actually in the next 5 or 10 years. So we shouldn't forget downstream. I think we tend to when we analyze these things. But we see high throughput disposable as the way of the future. I think there are, for our marketplace, I don't think we've seen any opportunities come in that we couldn't handle at 2,000-litre scale. As Jennifer said, we're seeing different classes of products coming in, so smaller, perhaps slightly more niche markets coupled with much higher productivity. But what the disposable technologies do at the end of the day, it's an occupancy business. It's not so very different from an airline or a hotel. We have, all of us, perhaps not Jim at the end, there's high fixed costs. We have to maintain a highly compliant environment. As I say, we've been licensed for 15 years. So you have to fill your tanks, and the more you can get through your facility, as a CDMO, the more you can get through your facility, the better off you are. So it basically allows higher throughput is really what the technologies do. Instead of cleaning and cleaning place and validation and all this stuff, we just rip the bags out and go on. So the technologies are tremendous. I think I won't say how long ago Jennifer and I worked together, many moons ago, but we've come a heck of a long way. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and this is probably 20 years ago now, that said that we manufactured cornflakes with more sophistication than we manufactured pharmaceuticals, and it was possibly true.
Wei Chang, have your customers, should I say, reported any sort of limitations with having only single-use capabilities?
And I think we are truly, we call CDMO, but I mean for WuXi, we really call we are enabler actually. So far we have really enabled our customer to meet their need. So essentially, I think by use multiple single-use bioreactor, maybe combined, like Roger said, with larger column, the facility actually would meet both from cost as well as capacity need. So far, I mean, there's always a request for us to compare what is the capacity and what is the cost. And eventually, especially for commercialization, regardless what technology you use, at the bottom line, people always ask how much dollar per gram you would deliver. So we actually would do that calculation, and we found quite favorably that a single use would meet the challenge. So from that end, so far no one forced us to go like a 20,000 liter scale or so, and we are managed to meet all the need. And just added one more thing, you mentioned Just last few weeks, we made an announcement to build a facility both in China as well as in Ireland based on the single-use technology. And I think it's based on that conviction that we will be able to meet the need both for cost as well as for capacity.
Jim, you mentioned process intensification earlier. Sticking with the sort of limitations of single use, are there limitations?
There are. I think what sometimes gets overlooked are things where we tie in conventional processes to the single use. One example is filtration. And so you need some pressure usually to perform filtration. And I've personally been involved with some cases where unfortunately a single use, as we all know, is a bag or let's just say not a pressure vessel where may not withstand some of the pressures that people see. When you have a process substrate, such as higher cell densities or something, and now your filtration isn't as efficient as maybe it was, with the lower cell densities, sometimes the operators and or the process development chemists don't understand how we will manipulate the single use through that. There are ways to do that, but it's a different play, and that's where there are some limitations with how we look at that. But as Roger said, novel technologies are coming into this. I truly believe on the downstream side that is the area for most growth to come forward, and things like the regulatory agencies asking for continuous processing and those types of things are what we're going to bring into that. That may be more of a hybrid approach. As a chemical engineer, you look at other industries, petrochemical and so on, they've been able to do their process relatively continuously and so on. If we can take some of the lessons learned there, bring it to our technologies with single use, but maybe some other hybrids, I really see the opportunities to be there. But single use does have some limitations, but with the proper design, the proper considerations, you usually can get around it.
And kind of picking on single use there, stainless steel, does that have any limitations still after however many years of being used in the industry?
Well, obviously it does. I personally am a part of the ASME Bioprocess Equipment Standard, and you could look at that book for all the limitations, such as rouge, such as surface finishes and other things that are there. And so it does have, we think of it that it will last forever. I buy a stainless steel tank, it will last forever. I can tell you personally, I've been involved in many cases where we've had to remove those tanks and had to do some things. So there is a limit to what can happen there. And cleanability and how you look at gaskets and other things in there are some limitations with really getting it to there. And I think we talked about once you get into now cleaning and in-place sterilization, a lot more risk presents itself and maybe is not as flexible as the single use.
Jennifer or Roger, do you want to come in on that and talk about stainless steel issues that your customers may be seeing?
Sure. I mean, most of what we have going through stainless steel, these are legacy processes we've been manufacturing for a very long time. No particular issues with those processes. I guess, Jim really probably covered the issues. The rouging. There are some issues we know with the bags, with cholesterol absorption onto plastics and things. It goes both ways. I think you've got to be careful. There might be a specific reason where you want to use stainless steel, but by and large, I think there's few and far between. There are no great limitations in stainless steel, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
I would echo pretty much what everybody said. Again, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's dependent on your situation. There are a massive number of variables that go into it depending on your individual situation as a company or even with the product that you're dealing with. I was really glad to hear Jim bring up not both issues, that there are technical issues with both types of technologies you have to pay attention to, you have to be aware of. The one thing I've been interested in is that when you talk to a lot of people before my colleague here developed use of the 4,000 liter scale single use, a lot of people are still very skeptical about that, and it has to do with the same types of things that Jim's talking about with high cell densities, high titers, your filters, your centrifugation. You're going to have some challenges there. And then, stainless steel also does wear over time. You have to do extra maintenance. But I still see, it's taken us, there's this explosion of single use, but it's taken, 10, I found an old publication when I was getting ready for this, like 10 or 15 years old, was talking about it as a new technology, but it's been around longer than that. Now it's finally taken off. And the single-use downstream, I've been hearing about that for a decade, And now in our facilities, we have it in our our mid-scale, which is kind of the combination of the two technology. So that's quite interesting. But I still see, we still see a lot of products, even newer products, complex ones, that still want large volume stainless steel long term. So again, I think it really depends on the particular situation. You just have to be aware of all the challenges for whatever situation you're in.
Wei Chang, when you talk about single use at a sort of 4,000 litre scale bag, I mean, volume-wise, you're not far off a 5,000 litre stainless steel tank. But how is this not a more costly, and you've got a single-use vessel, but you're really looking at the similar limitations that industry had with stainless steel, so but with a higher cost. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, clearly I think it's a 4,000 liter is still new, and I think we're actually going to see how that will play out. But just like when we compare stainless steel and single use, I think because there's multiple parameters, it's really depending on also really your process, your productivity, then you pick, if you go to 2,000 liter or go to 4,000 liter. We think we actually build a facility with 4,000 liter because we do have some of the products that may at a lower productivity, and therefore they may need a higher volume, right? But on the other hand, which is really one sense, probably we realize it's really the process change. I mean, we used to be fat batch culture pretty much for antibody, but there are more and more continuous processes now being used, both for cell culture, which traditional perfusion, but also for the downstream, the capturing, the continuous product capturing, which will reduce the column size dramatically and lower the resin cost. So we feel within this change, probably 2,000 liter, even 1,000 liter in some case, can meet the most needs in terms of product demand. But there's maybe always some product, for whatever the reason, you are at low productivity, therefore you may need a little bit of higher volume. That's where we think 4,000 liter may be alternative. But we need to wait and see, how much we're going to use 4,000 liter versus how much we're going to use 2,000 liter.
Does anyone want to chip in about any limitations that a 4,000 litre single-use bag might have, especially on bottlenecks in the downstream?
Well, I'm not trying to discourage use of single use, and I'm not putting it down, but like we talk about, there are limitations with everything, and it goes back to the higher densities and the higher titers. There are a lot of improvements, there are a lot of valuable things about it, but you still have to deal with the fact that you're dealing with a plastic bag.
Yeah, we got.
And
sorry, John.
and then you have to store the plastic bags. They have an expiration date. If they do have a problem when they're in use, you've lost valuable time. And then you just have to deal with all those kinds of issues. You have to deal with expiration dates. You have to deal with all the connections and stuff. But I think that stuff is going to continue to evolve. But it's the downstream, I think, we're still going to have to work on getting from the upstream to downstream, as Jim said, that, and both Roger and Wei Chang said, that's where the next 5 or 10 years is going to be.
Yeah, and Jim, I'm sure is a lot more familiar with this than me, but I think there's physics and material sciences coming here. Large volume bags. A few years ago, several years ago now, probably 10, visiting facilities that were developing 10,000 litre scale mixing bags. But do you see those out there now? Not so much. As physics comes into it, at some point, you get to a volumetric scale where just a plastic bag, which is what we're talking about, is not going to cut it.
No, I share that view, Roger. And I think if anyone has tried to think of the blue tarp or something in your backyard, a pool cover, and try to manipulate them and so on, as these bags get larger, think about the poor operators that have to get them in and out. Just unfolding one of these bags, even at 2,000 liter, needs specific training and proper ways to handle that. And then the physics of wall strengths and how to hold it, what type of holder you have it in. As you get bigger, again, with proper design, you can do this. And I think each case has its way of dealing with that.
Jim, sticking with you, because I'm sure the other 3 panelists will all say yes to this. But do end users, do the pharma firms actually care if their product is made in a single-use vessel rather than a stainless steel vessel, providing the capabilities and the capacities there, providing the costs aren't too high, and providing they're made safely?
I don't know that there's a preference. I think it goes back to all the points that the panel has said here. Cost, quality, and so on. We have to make a quality product. And I think if it can be shown and proven that the technologies that are available are the best way to do it, that's what the end user wants. I will say, what we teach in our courses and so on is think about the cells, think about the protein. They just want, and all we want for them is the best environment for them to make a safe and effective therapeutic. And I think that's the bottom line here, is that the molecules and the cells don't care about it. We just need to provide the environment that makes them the best. And that's what the end users want in the end here. And I'm sure all of the contract manufacturers also want.
Yeah, I'll argue with you, Dan. I'm not going to say. I'm going to say, at the end of the day, if you can get it for the same cost in the same time, you don't care. But obviously, what we've been discussing is the advantages potentially for many projects and processes of single use in terms of being able to move through the facility more quickly, less time, less materials costs. Of course, could go up because you're dealing with the plastic, but you're not cleaning and validating and all that good stuff. So I don't think the client particularly minds. There's very few, maybe there's some very subtle technical issues, but they're few and far between. At the end of the day, if you could do it for the same cost, I don't think the client minds.
But I think the technology, just added one point, which is very interesting, is always evolving, right? 10 years ago when we say single use, we use 100 liter, 50 liter, and then go 1,000 liter. Some of manufacturing even say we'll never make 2,000 liter. But I think here we are, right? And everyone does that. But another thing that how this will further evolving is really, anyone's guess, because it really depends on the product demand, depending on, next few years what is a new modality come, right? And clearly, the process will continue evolving, and that's another thing. We don't use today's technology for legacy process, and that may be very different. So I think the technology, will continue evolving. Particularly, next few years, I'm looking forward to more downstream, kind of get a more single use, much smaller footprint. Right now, just we talk about we need a single use, shrinking the footprint of facility. But as a WFI use, the buffer usage still need a huge stainless steel tank, and somehow defer the purpose as well. So I think I'm looking forward to more the downstream improvement in the next few years.
I would agree. I would agree with everything that everybody said, which sounds a little silly, but at the end of the day, we're trying to treat patients and cure diseases. Honestly, that's why we're all here. That's what gets us up in the morning. And if we can make a good product, we can get it out there, we're going to make an impact. And everybody has preferences. It's funny when you can present a good business case to somebody, but they're stuck on this thing. This is just how I want to do it. This is what I know, what I'm familiar with. Whereas somebody else is easily influenced just by, and it could be a technical solution, it could be dollars, it could be anything. So I think it's the same thing I've said at least twice, is I don't think there's any one solution. I think there are all kinds of options. The more options we have, the better. And I don't want to sound like a commercial, but one of the things I really like about Lonza now is we've got, Lonza's been a stable company for a long time, where we talks about large scale, but we're into all kinds of new technologies now and developing new things and new approaches. And the same as all these gentlemen, we're trying to come up with new, interesting ways to make stuff faster, cheaper, better, and still keep it reliable, high quality, and getting it to patients. And making money. That's for all the investors.
Of course, yeah. So we've spoken about how single use has enabled companies like Wuxi and Payfin, Catalent, and many others to offer we look at companies like Amgen and their ballroom facility in Singapore, and Pfizer and some of the other big end users, themselves investing in single use, and then some of the smaller biotechs as well being enabled to invest in their own in-house capabilities through single use. Is single use a threat to outsourcing, which has kind of only grown for the last few years?
Do you want me to go?
Well, one thing I would say is CMOs are not immune to the concept that internal manufacturing is probably your biggest competitor, I mean, more so than other CMOs. It's the same story. Certain companies have the expertise and the resources to handle clinical facilities. Some of them have commercial, but it's the same old story as when we were back in the days when we were all startups. As soon as you start investing in manufacturing and quality and regulatory, especially at the commercial scale, then the whole shift and focus of your company changes and your whole value proposition changes. So it's a matter of what do you want to be and where do you want to go with that. So single use to me in some ways internally isn't a threat in that it enables people to get products further along, and they're still going to probably outsource a good portion of them. There's always going to be outsourcing, whether they stay at that scale when they outsource or not. To me, it's more of an enabler. It's a little bit of a threat, but I think it's more of an enabler.
Yeah, I think I'd largely agree with Jennifer there. I think we should never forget that bioreactors don't run themselves. It is a people business. For a small company, especially, to move into their own manufacturing, I'm not sure that the equation is any different when it used to be stainless steel. A lot of cost, a lot of expertise. It definitely changes your dynamic. So for earlier phase, for small company, I honestly don't know why anybody would do that versus come to us or go to Lonza. It just doesn't make sense at all. It is a people business without a doubt. And then in terms of the threat of, so you mentioned Amgen, these guys have incredibly complicated, I won't say too much, I know Amgen very well. The Singapore facility is remarkable, some of the productivity they're producing out of it. So I think they're doing us all a favor in many ways, because companies like Amgen, CDMO, it's tough to stay right at the front of the technology curve. We're working for clients, we're reliant on those clients to enable us to do that sort of work. So actually, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to the Amgens and the Pfizers who are, pushing the envelope on this. So I personally don't see any threat.
Jim?
Yeah, I'd echo what Jennifer and Roger said. I think it's interesting how you said it. Look at more mature businesses, and I think that's where we are as an industry. We're maturing. We're still maybe post-adolescence. I don't want to give the analogy, but in the food industry, contract manufacturing is really the way for most of the large multinationals and where they are, right? We're not quite there yet. And I think the points that both Roger and Jennifer brought up of a smaller company, I've worked for many smaller biotechs, and they don't have the manufacturing folks, so it makes sense to go to one of their companies to help them get there. But at the same time, as their process development people want to dive into the single use now and to really go there. If they have an established relationship with one of these companies, it works great. They usually get a reference point of where their past product went or what to do. If they haven't, it's almost like maybe they should just go to one of these to start, and it's just there. Amgen, I'm a past employee there. I can't say enough about the cutting edge and what their leadership has really been.
Go on, we check.
Yeah, maybe just at one point, and I think really, I think to me, the challenge actually is not either or. I mean, everyone made the point is the people, is the ability. But I think for single use, especially for bioreactor, one challenge is really, we have so many different companies. I don't know how many single use bioreactor provider. If you look in, there are many different types, and this actually became quite a challenge in terms of supply chain. If you have 4 or 5 different type of those bioreactors, have to store different bags, and then actually it is a challenge. So I actually would, hopefully industry will working together to standardize some of the technology, and if not just one, maybe just a couple of single-use bioreactor and for fed batch or for perfusion, Therefore, it would be much easier in terms of transferability of the process. If we have too many unique bioreactors, actually would hinder the technology transfer. And for sure, everyone would do their own system, and then end up everyone has a similar challenge.
Yes, Jim.
I would just like to build on that. I've done some work with the BPSA, the Bioprocess Systems Alliance, which is basically an organization from SOCMA, the plastics people, for single use. And one of the challenges is, as compared to stainless steel, we pretty much know the grades of stainless steel, 316L, 304, we know that. That is one of the challenges with single use is each polymer, each bag film is proprietary to the manufacturers of that. So it's not the same thing. And now you bring in things like the testing we have to do, dare I say, leachables and extractables and so on, and it gets more complicated. And then my own pet thing is even the connectors now. When we teach our single-use course that we do for students and professional advancement, we have to train them on 7, 8, 9, even 10 connectors so they're familiar with what's out there. And it would be a lot nice if we had, and I don't want this, the tri-clamp style, one thing to go with. And it's going to take a while because each of these companies have a very good idea. They all, for the most part, work and do effective jobs. The bag films are all very good, sophisticated for what they do, for gas permeability, tear strength. All that goes into this. But now that is a complexity that gets added to this.
And one minor but important point to build on that is that, of course, if you're a vendor of particular bags and connectors, you want to keep your uniqueness because that's your business value. But as Roger was saying, you have the innovator companies who are driving the use of this technology. It's going to become standardized whether somebody wants it to or not. And I think part of the challenge with overly specialized equipment that you have to use, there's a huge growth. There's a lot of demand. At some point, we're going to have supply challenges. Then what do? You're wed to a particular vendor. You're with their extractables and leachables profile and your regulatory filing. And we all know we hate to change things that cause changes in regulatory filings and, God forbid, trigger new trials, which is maybe a little dramatic, but I think it's a valid concern.
Yeah, another interesting dynamic, of course, is now we're seeing some of the equipment bag-type manufacturers acquiring contract manufacturers. It'd be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Lots of just things you don't think about. Warehousing. So we're somewhat agnostic. We have most of the major manufacturers' equipment in our facility. We're client-driven. At some point, we're going to have to standardize a little bit more as we scale up. But have you been in a warehouse recently? I used to go in a warehouse, it was little white pots of materials, now it's just cardboard boxes everywhere, full of disposable equipment. It's a big issue. It's a huge issue. We're going to have to design warehouses 3 times the size of what we used to. There are all sorts of knock-on effects. The environmental impact, we shouldn't forget about that. Interesting. But we're not going to be going backwards, I don't believe, that's for sure.
How do you manage the single-use equipment that you install in these flexible facilities with the single-use equipment that your customers may be trying to bring in for later phase projects? So Weichang, for example, if you've filled one of your facilities with a certain brand, a certain mark, can you take on people's projects using that equipment, or do you have to instill the single-use bags through the vendors that they've been using in early phase?
I think I brought up that issue in terms of like a bioreactor standardization. But I think luckily, we still are only few leading brands. So for that, we definitely can manage that. And I don't think that would be a create a do-or-die issue. And the point I bring up is that because of certain success, then there's more company created more different type of bioreactor. And that's essentially, from my viewpoint, I would discourage that because you just don't want to have 10, 20 different type of the similar bioreactor, and then you have inventory problem, like everyone said. I mean, so far we actually manage quite well in terms of the, the different type of bioreactor and how we, store that. That's sometimes standardization, like 2,000 liter couple of leading vendor, that's help us. And so for now, I don't see much more issue. But I will agree one thing is that when there's more and more single-use reactor out of there, and if companies begin to try, everyone trying different type, then will create some issues. And particularly for process transfer. Right.
And I do think it's important to remember these are not all the same. These, have all these built-in ports and things. Every company's got a different impeller system. Everything. It's not a one-size-fits-all here. So you've got to transferring between one single-use bioreactor and another manufacturer's single-use bioreactor is not an insignificant challenge. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
It's like buying a lawnmower with all the parts and no instructions.
Nice analogy. Roger, you mentioned before of vendors buying CMOs. I'm wondering what the panel think about that specific example, Thermo Fisher buying Patheon, if that's going to give Patheon a competitive advantage over their peers. The fact that the Thermo Fisher now own Patheon.
I don't know that it will be an advantage. I think in some ways it may be seen as they would lack the flexibility to maybe bring in other kit that they would be there or the driver to it. What I can say is almost every one of the vendors has to buy components from the other ones to come through. Because as we said, if a process is validated on, let's say, a certain filter, you're probably not going to do a resubmission to change out that filter to the one that you're doing. And so brand X filter can be on brand Y assembly, and same thing goes for the connectors. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Now, if you're starting from zero, if you're a brand new company, and I do think that's what you are seeing, where I believe the intent is to say, can you come into our kit and our train and how we go about that. And then there may be some business strategy to go and do that, and that may be good from some sides, but may remove some flexibility where, let's say that filter, for some reason, their brand of filter, you don't get the best performance. How would you go to another filter and be able to change that? That's been the conundrum under process development forever. I can tell you back in the 90s, when we would look at filtration, we'd be primarily one brand, but we'd find that another brand gave us an advantage, and we used that because, again, we wanted to make the best drug that we could.
So could consolidation amongst vendors, would you be encouraging that just to make processes easier? Whoever wants to take.
I don't know about encouraging it. Clearly, there's been a huge amount of consolidation. No secret there. It's one thing I do know is that some of those companies who've acquired or been merged with other companies with a similar model, different operating system, different software, different control systems. It's very, very difficult to then transition to basically running as truly one operation of one company. So several of these, in essence, without picking on anybody, they still run as several separate entities. They're not really very standardized yet. It's a huge challenge. In terms of encouraging it or not, I mean, I guess every time two competitors merge, we have one less competitor, right?
I think go back to both process and also the technology. I don't think it's a consolidation is the answer. I think it's standardization. And I think that undoubtedly there will be many companies, and both technology side as well as from our side, like CMO, CDMO. I think make sure how we, standardize to some extent. That would help the whole industry, and somehow, just looking, the cell line side, looking over the years, people, for example, now more and more standardized CHO cells for for antibody production for recombinant protein. But I think the technology, they may work their way towards standardization as well, but maybe take much longer time. And so I do see and more and more standardization, particularly, for example, technology side.
And Jim, working with the BPSA, standardization, is that a reality?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, and we've headed a lot of roundtables in form like this to try to do that. And I don't know how much it's really alignment versus standardization. Standardization is kind of capital S, and when we talk about organizations like ANSI accredited organizations, ISO, and so on, it gets difficult to go down here. Like, I'll go back to the film analogy we were talking before. One idea is, could we come up with one film like 316L? In theory, we could. In reality, I think it would be very difficult to kind of do something like that and to look at a polymer to go there. I think the other way is BPOG has given some examples with the extractables kind of protocol and so on, and there's been a lot of debate about that. Change management, as we talked about here, is really the key. I can tell you from consolidation that we've seen on vendors doing that. Even the change of the vendor name on the label that comes in, now the end users have to file a change management thing within their system because they need to know what are the components coming in and how they checked in. So that causes a lot. BPSA and BPOG got together to write up a position to really try to normalize that. I wouldn't call it a standard, but definitely some advice as to how to go about that. And I see that more of the approach. And then as we mature as an industry, maybe we could take lessons from other industries like semiconductor or others where they've been able to drive it from that side.
Being from Silicon Valley, years and years ago, it was all the industry groups that would get together and the quality groups, and they'd God forbid, with all us scientists, bioscientists and biochemists, they would bring in people from the chip industry, and they'd just shake their heads and say, we thought we were so special, we thought all our processes were so unique, and nobody could ever do it, nobody could ever repeat it, and they're going to need us forever. They said, someday that will happen to you all. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that as industry matures. And well, all this standardization is going to be a challenge for some time. I don't know how it'll get resolved, when or if, but you know what? I think it'll start to get resolved when the next big cool technology or thing comes along, and it's coming. These things are coming along faster and faster, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, if Samsung and Apple can get the same connector, we'll be fine.
Talking
Not going to happen.
Talking of Samsung, let's go back to investments by CDMOs, and we can't drop this panel without talking about Samsung Biologics. They're kind of on their own. They've suddenly jumped up from nowhere by investing through stainless steel in thousands and thousands of litres of capacity. At the same time, Lonza and Boehringer Ingelheim have also increased their capacity through stainless steel. Jennifer, as a representative from Lonza and someone who's worked at Samsung Biologics, where, with the drop-off of blockbusters, where is the demand for this huge capacity coming from?
Great question. It's just there. I know that's not really an answer to your question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, antibodies have been the backbone of the industry for decades, and then it's when a problem comes along that some new interesting technology comes along. Most of us here are probably old enough, sorry Roger, we're that old, but to remember when everybody started to panic because some crazy person on Wall Street said there was a capacity shortage, and it wasn't true, but it forced people to come around to the idea of, holy cow, we better improve our titers. We better re-engineer our cell lines. And there are things like that happening. But we have complex molecules, and it was interesting to watch the evolution of blockbusters, and then all of a sudden people said there are not going to be no more blockbusters out there clinically. Well, shockingly, there still seem to be a few. Everybody's trying to count on Alzheimer's and all these other big indications. Those are not quite there yet. But you start to see some of these products that seem like they were smaller indications, maybe smaller volume, but people are getting a little smarter about how they do their trials and what their applications are. You see the products they're choosing have multiple indications or combinations. I mean, you can't go out and look at a product that has one or two clinical trials. Almost everything out there has hundreds of trials by the time you're done. So that's part of it, and I still think there are unique molecules other than antibodies that are driving it. So it's a variety of factors. Again, I think evolution of the industry and clinically for one.
I was reading, trying to get an answer over here, but I don't see it.
From who?
From the Samsung booth.
Oh, well, a couple of them are in the audience, but you know, I have to be very careful. I don't represent Samsung anymore, but I did represent them for years, and I believe in what they're doing just as much as I believe in what we're doing at Lonza.
Roger, you kind of shook your head before at the thought of 20,000 litres. What are your views on Samsung Biologics' huge investments? And not just them, but they are right in front of us, so let's pick on them.
I do think it's fascinating. I was privileged to go visit the first of the many facilities some years back, and without doubt, Samsung's doing a fantastic job. What they're installing is amazing. The folks at Samsung are not, they're not silly. They know what they're doing. They have a market, I think, without a doubt. Do we look at them as a competitor? Honestly, no. We just play in a very different space. But we are still, what would worry me, I think, is almost sort of aligning with what Jennifer was saying. If you look at biosimilars now, we're having to almost go backwards because we're remanufacturing products that were developed 15, 20 years ago. In 15, 20 years, those products that are being launched to the market are going to be using technologies that are available now. So can you keep filling those facilities, I think is my question. So I'm intrigued by it, I have to say. But
There's this, I don't know what you'd call it, idea out in the industry that all the big guys are only making biosimilars. That's completely untrue. I used to have to make that speech when I was at my former employer, and I have to make it now. There are a lot of other products out there that need large volume, just as there are a lot of products out there that need 2,000 or 5,000. It's the same as I said earlier. It's not either or. I think it's there.
Yeah, we can go for it.
But I mean, I think the capacity management would be a huge issue going forward. I mean, there's so many capacity built up, and I know for a fact in Asia and worldwide, there are added more and more capacity. So undoubtedly there is a challenge to manage that. Especially, I mean, we had a really good year for all biologics. But if you look right now, I mean, I don't think it's alarm or anything. Technology, is a progress. You now have a CAR T, you now have a gene therapy, and they will not replace biologics, but they will complement it, just like a complementary biologics to small molecule. So I do believe build something which is flexible. You can adapt the technology to other things would be very critical. I mean, just like before, people talk about capacity shortage, but soon people will talk about this overcapacity, then there will be capacity shortage again. So that's just market force. And in order to deal with that, I think we need to have a flexibility. That would be, what we haven't planned to do, and we hope, keep to do that.
Jim, I was just going to ask, are we at risk of having too much capacity?
Roger, did you have a comment? I don't think so. I think as the panelist said, is the work's out there and the demands are there, and I think it'll just morph into other types of products. We see monoclonals, and now we're going to others. The gene therapies, the immunotherapies, and so on, I think are gonna be there. I do think that is something we have to keep an eye on for scale, because I can tell you a lot of the single-use vendors are now looking at going down to like 1/8-inch tubing and so on, and where are we going to go with that? And when we're talking about personalized medicine, it is going to be smaller, but it's going to be many of those. And how do we go about that, and what do we do? When that happens, I hope I'm around to see it, and I'm hoping around, to see it at scale. Definitely our children and them will reap the real benefits of that. And as opposed to now where we need a team of postdocs to really implement a lot of this work to go there.
And I think we've got to look at the overall market. Biologics market growing at 15% a year, whatever it is, compound annual growth rate. We're seeing new markets being open. Southeast Asia, of course, everybody's very aware of. Another thing we need to remember as well, that we as an industry really are still, young. We're still growing. So if we look at capacity expansion, I've got, however many customers in-house, that should they be successful in the clinic, and we hope they are, they're going to need a heck of a lot more capacity, and that's just our current customers. So some of this capacity that's being added is just to serve the current customer base. We're not in any danger, I don't think, certainly for at least the medium term, of being in a supply-demand imbalance there. And we should remember as well that some of these, we were talking about all our disposables, a lot more flexible. We can wheel stuff in and out now. We can balance that demand on a more tactical level as well. So I certainly don't have any concerns. Of course, I'm not sitting with 500, 2,000 litre tanks either, 20,000 litre tanks.
They're full, Roger.
And
we keep filling them.
That's good. We like that.
People keep it. It's the same thing I said earlier. I don't see a problem with influx of lots and lots of 2,000 liter single use, because the industry needs the capacity. There are different needs, and the business is there, and it'll correct itself. I think a market corrects itself based on the need. Everybody builds, and then people back off, and then they build again, and they back off. It's just like any other market, any other industry.
And on that note, I'm afraid to say that we've actually run out of time, and I'd like to carry on talking for a lot longer, but that we have another session coming up. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating in this discussion, and I'm sure they will hang around if anyone's got any burning questions for them. So thank you so much.